Good afternoon and hello to everyone, members and guests, and welcome to today's webinar, the UAE-Africa Outlook 2022. Africa is fast emerging as one of the most important markets for the United Arab Emirates. And with its set for recovery in 2022, the UAE continues to recognize the immense potential in the emerging markets of the continent. The UAE is not one of the only leading exporters of goods to several African countries. It is also amongst the top 10 importers of goods and commodities from more than 10 African countries today. As you all know, our economic outlooks are set for the beginning of each calendar year, and this year it gives me enormous pleasure to add the UAE-Africa Outlook to our lineup. We have a fantastic set of speakers who are experts in their subjects joining us today, and I will just have a quick introduction to them and then hand over to the panel for their remarks. So Hassan Al-Hashemi, Vice President of International Relations at the Dubai Chamber of Commerce and a long-standing partner of Invest Africa through the Global Business Forum Africa, which is held every other year in Dubai. We are also joined by Sonny Zulu, Managing Director, Consumer, Private and Business Banking, UAE Standard Chartered Bank. And then to make up the full complement, we have Isabelle Simon, Regional Manager from GardaWorld, and Michael Susong, Senior Vice President, Crisis 24 of GardaWorld. So, ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of house rules before we kick off. As you all know, this session will be recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available to the Invest Africa members afterwards. If you'd like to know more about Invest Africa, our services and our membership, please don't hesitate to contact us after the session. We will have a moment for Q&A at the end of our program today, so please do submit your questions via the questions tab or send an email into the Invest Africa team. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Hassan Al-Hashemi, Vice President, International Relations at the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. Good afternoon, Hassan. Over to you.
Good afternoon, good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. On behalf of Dubai Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you all and thank Invest Africa for organizing this event as a platform to explore UAE-Africa trade and investment synergies. This comes at a time when economies in Africa are emerging from the pandemic and tapping into new trade and investment opportunities in an effort to drive sustainable growth. Strong commitment to free trade, progress related to vaccination efforts, and reduced inflation are just some of the key trends that are supporting the positive outlook for Africa in 2022. With its untapped resources, infrastructure needs, and surging population, Africa presents one of the last major investment opportunities for international players. Sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, is a market of strategic importance to foreign investors, as the regional economy will grow by 3.8% in 2022. That's more than twice as fast as South Asia, projected at 1.2%, and Latin America at 0.9%. The United Arab Emirates remains the largest investor in Africa among GCC countries, and the country continues to adapt a strategic and proactive approach to expanding its ties with promising markets across the continent. Strategic bilateral cooperation agreements, high-level visits, and incentives to attract African investors and businesses to the United Arab Emirates have helped facilitate trade and investment between the two regions in recent years. Meanwhile, the UAE has actively partnered with African countries for investments in the key sectors of infrastructure, oil and energy, telecommunication, agriculture, and tourism. With its close proximity to the continent, valuable expertise, and strong appetite for foreign investments, Dubai has all of the advantages and resources needed to support the continent's future growth. Several African countries have already joined Dubai's World Logistics Passport, a pioneering global initiative offering a range of financial incentives to use the Emirates' logistics services and expertise. This is a positive sign for Dubai's growing appeal among African traders. And we see this initiative along with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and Expo 2020 Dubai as major opportunities to take UAE-Africa trade and investment to the next level. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is a market of strategic importance to Dubai and Dubai Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber has expanded its efforts over the last 8 years to strengthen Dubai's trade ties with promising African markets. In 2013, the Chamber embarked on an ambitious expansion strategy as it established 4 representative offices on the continent. We are in Kenya, Ethiopia, in Ghana, and in Mozambique, and expect that network to grow quite fast in the coming years. These offices are tasked with identifying business opportunities in African markets that offer the most potential to our members and Dubai's business community, while they promote Dubai as a global business hub and attracting African companies to set up in the Emirate and take advantage of our strategic location. Complementing these efforts is the Global Business Forum Africa, one of Dubai Chamber's flagship event, which serves as a catalyst for expanding trade links between Africa and Dubai. The 6th edition of the forum, held at Expo 2020 Dubai last October, saw a record number of bilateral business meetings between African and UAE businessmen, the highest since the launch of GBF series. This reflects the forum's growing importance and its reputation as a leading platform for establishing economic partnerships and strengthening trade relations. And I take this opportunity to thank our partners in West Africa for their incredible support over the many years past. The ever-expanding trade links between Africa and Dubai have demonstrated the success of our expansion strategy for the continent. Dubai's non-oil trade with Africa reached $50 billion in 2020, despite the pandemic challenges, marking the highest level in the last decade. Investment inflows between Dubai and Africa have continued to grow, and a number of Pan-African companies have relocated their headquarters to the Emirate. Meanwhile, the number of African companies registered with Dubai Chamber increased by 15.5% since 2019, reaching close to 30,000 companies today. As Dubai pushes ahead with an ambitious new 5-year strategy to boost foreign trade to 2 trillion dirhams, Africa is expected to be a top target market as the continent offers tremendous trade opportunities that remain untapped. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is clearly going through a major transformation as the COVID-led digital shift. Regional economic integration and political reforms create new growth opportunities. Yet, there remain challenges due to the level of uncertainty related by the pandemic. The forthcoming discussions that we're going to witness today will shed some light on the evolving business climate in Africa and offer valuable insight on what's happening across the continent on economic, social, and political levels. At the same time, this is an ideal opportunity to examine existing UAE-Africa synergies and capitalize on bilateral businesses, in this case, emerging on the horizon. Please remember that our representative offices in Africa are ready and more than willing to assist both African and UAE companies that are keen to expand their global reach. So we encourage you to take advantage of the support they can offer you. Take this opportunity once again to thank the organizers for this great invitation, for this great forum. I also take this opportunity to thank all the wonderful speakers that are joining us today and look forward for a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for that illuminating introduction. And we're privileged and honored to have you and the Dubai Chamber do our opening and welcome remarks. Thank you. And I'd like to ask Michael Susong and Isabelle Simon from GardaWorld to prepare to provide their presentation to you. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And on behalf of GardaWorld and Crisis 24 Business Division, which Isabelle and I are members of, we're excited about the opportunity to support Invest Africa Forum. And we would like to underscore many of Hassan's comments. We're excited for those of us who live and work on the continent. There's a lot of opportunity. Isabelle and her team, who focus on risk and opportunity on the continent, will highlight a lot of the details that we all face, but I'm confident from history and the energy that the UAE is applying to the region will be successful for all. So again, thank you for the opportunity, Karen, Invest Africa, and I'll turn it over to Isabelle.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So as Hassan mentioned, Africa's economy is beginning to recover following its first recession in 25 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is thanks to a resumption of global trade following months of disruptions and easing of stringent domestic pandemic measures and elevated raw material prices, as well as a rebound in commodity prices. This will surely provide greater investment and trade opportunities for Africa's partner. However, despite making some gains, the growth remains dependent on various factors, such as high levels of public debt, but also an extremely volatile political and security environment within multiple states, which represent key challenges for business operation across the continent into 2022. In terms of politics, we've seen indeed improved and interesting political situations, notably in Malawi, where there was an election rerun in June 2020 following the annulment of the elections in June 2019. We've seen the first democratic transition in Niger, and we've seen for the first time the opponents being elected against the long-time ruling PF party in Zambia in August 2021. So those improved political situations have indicated a good trend towards democracy and stability across Africa. But it comes nevertheless with challenges for these newly elected presidents, such as economic ones in Zambia and security ones in Niger. Political instabilities are also occurring in other parts of the continent and may impact business operations into 2022. First of all, we've seen that coup d'etat and military regimes have become recurrent in the past few years across the continent, notably in Mali, in Guinea, now in Burkina Faso, and in Sudan. In Mali, the junta sought to delay the election, which were planned for February, which prompted the ECOWAS to enact strong economic measures. And those measures will likely have a strong impact on the national economy, but also on regional trade and the movement of people, which could fuel further political tensions and social discontent in the near term. Likewise, in Guinea, the political situation may risk worsening as the junta seems unwilling to hand over power to civilian governments. We are witnessing increasing discontent within the military-led government, and it could prompt further political tensions as well as social discontent in the near term. In Burkina Faso, the situation remains very fluid at the moment, but the junta is likely to remain in power until further notice. And finally, in Sudan, the democratic transition has been jeopardized by the October coup. General Al-Burhan seems unwilling to hand over power to civilians, which will likely continue to fuel massive civil unrest across the country. And likewise, if the government is unable to tackle strong economic challenges such as inflation and shortage of essential commodities such as bread and fuel, this will likely trigger further instability across the country over the coming year. South Africa, for its part, is experiencing its own governance breakdown. The country's primary challenges, including corruption, rampant unemployment, poor governance and service delivery, as well as deep economic crisis, are likely to persist into 2022. And we've seen that these issues can lead to massive protests, such as this one that occurred in July 2021, and that severely disrupted businesses and supply chain operations. We also have multiple election-related challenges in the months ahead, including in Angola and in Kenya. In August, Angola will have its legislative elections, and the MPLA ruling party has indicated that João Lourenço will be the candidate for the presidency should the MPLA wins a majority during the legislative elections. We are already seeing tensions ahead of these elections with some social unrest across the country because the performance of the president are being increasingly criticized due to his inability to tackle some strong socio-economic challenges. Likewise, in Kenya, this will surely be a fiercely contested election, and that will likely turn violent. Opposition leader Raila Odinga has confirmed his peace bid, but he's now supported by President Kenyatta, who is not allowed to run, against his deputy president William Ruto. So the outcome of the election is far from guaranteed, as the ruling Jubilee Party is likely to split between supporters of Kenyatta and therefore Odinga, and supporters of William Ruto. As witnessed in the past, Kenya's elections are known to be quite tense, and this one is not likely to be different, which could cause great instability across the country. In terms of security, we have multiple hotspots across the continent. In the Sahel region, militias and jihadist violence continue to spread. Despite some military victories, the Sahelian armies seem unable to effectively counter the threats, as is the G5 Sahel. And with France pulling over some of its manpower and resources from the region, and administration in those countries failing to counter the jihadist spread, there is a risk that a significant security vacuum would emerge in the near term, and providing militants additional room to attack, but most importantly, to expand further south to Western African coastal countries such as Benin and Côte d'Ivoire. On the other hand, Nigeria's alarming security situation is not likely to improve in the near term. The country remains marred by overlapping security challenges, including the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, widespread criminal activities, and increasing violence between farmers and herders, moving from the central belt southwards. Nigeria's kidnapping industry will only continue to thrive into 2022, which will continue to pose greater concerns for travelers and businesses across the country. And the 2023 presidential elections will also surely bring lots of uncertainties in the country, as multiple political actors will jockey for power. In Ethiopia, the security situation remains extremely volatile. The conflict is still raging, although it is now restricted to southern and western parts of the Tigray region. The TPLF has made calls for a negotiation and ceasefire. However, the federal government seems unwilling to address these issues, especially due to the recent territorial gains the government made. However, it seems unlikely that the TPLF will remain idle, especially as the government is still conducting some military offensives within the Tigray region, but also because the flow of humanitarian aid is still obstructed. Therefore, there is a risk that the TPLF will try to launch counter operation back into Amhara and Afar regions in the coming months, which means the conflict is far from being over. On the other side, the ongoing Islamist insurgency in Mozambique continues to imperil the burgeoning gas industry. And regardless of the counter-military offensive in the region, the area's deep systemic woes, coupled with the government's seeming unwillingness to tackle these issues, will likely continue to fuel militancy in the area. But most worrying is that the jihadist threat is now spreading across Mozambique into the neighboring Niassa province, which neighbors Cabo Delgado. And the Niassa province is really hard to patrol and control, and there is a risk that the jihadist militants may expand further into Mozambique and maybe into Tanzania as well, as we are witnessing increased threat in southern Tanzania bordering Mozambique. Last but not least, the security situation in Eastern DRC is not likely to improve in the near term. The state of siege, which was implemented in May in North Kivu and Ituri provinces, has borne no fruit since then, and the ADF rebel group has even increased attacks in the area. The ADF has also conducted attacks in neighboring Uganda, which prompted the Uganda government to launch a regional counter-offensive operation with DRC armed forces in the Ituri and North Kivu provinces. However, as we've seen in the past, those kind of operations have usually failed, and it is not likely that this final offensive will result in a different outcome, thus seriously disrupting the stability of the region. So overall, we are seeing good business opportunity across the continent thanks to an ongoing slow economic recovery, but this is in the backdrop of growing insecurity and quite fragile politics in multiple states across the continent. And there, thank you for listening, and I'll leave it to you, Sonny.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. That was a really comprehensive overview and much information to digest. So thank you to you and thank you to Michael. I'd now like to ask Sonny Zulu from Standard Chartered Bank in the UAE to join us. Sonny, over to you. I know you have some presentation to share with us. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen, and a very, very good afternoon and good morning to everyone. I have some slides that I'll be able to share just to help me to talk through what I want to share just now. And just for you to know, Standard Chartered has been operating in the UAE for over 60 years. And also in Africa, in most of the countries, over 150 years. And we have a number of corridors that we look at as Standard Chartered. Now, I must mention that the Africa UAE corridor is one of the critical corridors that we actually look at. The way that I've structured my short presentation this time, I'll look at what we have seen over the past few years, what we are seeing now, and what we expect to see as we move forward. Let me start with what we have seen. We have seen that Sub-Saharan Africa is an increasingly important trading partner for UAE. And over the years, that has been growing year on year. The data that you're seeing now goes up to 2020. As we have now finalized 2021, we have already the numbers, and we can see that that has actually gone up even further. And when we look at it by country, we see that most of this trade, the bilateral trade, is happening with South Africa, Sudan, Uganda, and going all the way. And that's what it means if you look at the potential for some of the countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, it means that there still remains a very, very huge potential to be able to grow that trade. What we are seeing again is that the Middle East actually overtook some of the countries or regions. It is now the fourth largest trading partner, for Africa. And if you look at the graph on the screen, you'll see that some of the regions like the European Union, that has been coming down somewhere from 2014-15. However, the Middle East remained very steady. Almost everybody was impacted in 2020, but as we got into 2021, there has been that recovery. And speaking of the Middle East, we have also seen that if you look at the GCC countries, UAE accounts for about 88% of the FDI investment into Africa. And the GCC, we're talking of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, plus the UAE itself. And most of that has been concentrated mostly in East Africa, if you look at the Sub-Saharan Africa. What else do we see? We see that the UAE, when it comes to being the trading partner, UAE is actually not only going up, but it's actually has overtaken Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia was leading, but the UAE now has overtaken and continues to go up. So therefore, UAE becomes a very important partner for Africa. In terms of what we are seeing now is that there has been an increase in terms of the imports and exports, the trade balance between Africa and the UAE. And in both cases, whether you're looking at imports or you're looking at exports, that has been going up. And we are also seeing that most of the exports to UAE from Sub-Saharan Africa has been in pearls, precious stones, and gold. This is even as we are seeing it now. And in terms of imports, there's been manufactured goods and fuels. This also, poses a number of opportunities in terms of manufactured goods. For example, from Africa into the UAE, there's still, a lot of room to be able to export finished products from Africa into the UAE, and there's quite a lot of non-fuel primary commodities that remains as an opportunity on both sides. In terms of what we expect and looking forward, for UAE, we are looking at improving fundamentals. From our perspective and from the research that has been done internally, our house view, UAE remains very bullish on the short-term and medium-term recovery prospects. UAE has done very, very well in a number of areas. So if you look at the short term, for instance, Expo has been a huge booster to the UAE. And now we've seen a lot of people coming into the UAE. You can imagine that just in 3 months, more than 8 million people have visited Expo. There were a lot of concerns when the pandemic came through, whether this was going to happen, but what we are seeing is actually quite encouraging. UAE has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and that has really helped for the market to really open up. And this has become a haven for a lot of people. They want to come in and live here, not only to live here, but also for tourism. It has really picked up over the last few months. And beyond Expo, we see that demographics and digitalization as well should continue to provide a support to the growth. We have also seen that the policies have been enhanced to attract more people, expatriates, to come and live in the UAE. Very, very, delighted that I'm one of the beneficiaries of the Golden Visa, and we have so many people that are now getting up to 10 years visas of staying in the UAE. We are seeing that the inheritance laws are being enhanced, and so many different areas just to liberalize the residence requirements. And if you look at the property market, the PPI has actually improved significantly. In some of the communities, property prices have actually picked up to over 54%. In obviously it's averaging out, because in some it's like 3, 4, 5 and so on, but there has been a massive recovery that we are seeing in the UAE, and that continues to be very promising. There's a lot of demand. The inventory, for example, for villas has become very, very low at the moment in the UAE. There's so much demand. We also see that with the OPEC cuts being relaxed on our production, that should be able to generate new revenue streams for the UAE. And we see that our projections as well, even on the oil prices, that should actually be able to help. We're looking at maybe 72, 70, above 70 dollars per barrel. When we look at CPI, that is likely to rise further in 2022, and obviously that is being driven by what we are seeing on the property market, what we are seeing in the tourism sector. And we are also seeing that with the World Cup happening in this region in this year, we'll see a lot of people still choosing the UAE to be a hub where they will be coming through, either for tourism or as they are waiting for their next match. This remains a very, very strong hub. What about on the other side? What are we seeing on Africa? The uneven vaccine access is really clouding the outlook for 2022 for Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, the vaccination rate has been lagging the rest of the world. In some of the countries, it's as low, this was as at November, as low as 1.5%. We must mention though that, this being the case, we still see that most of the cases are still very mild in most of the countries. The symptoms are very, very mild, and we are not seeing quite a lot of immediate impact in terms of to the economy from the direct impact of the pandemic. However, there are a lot of other impacts that are coming in terms of travel restrictions and so on, is still having a very big impact on tourism. We are seeing, as we look forward, that there will be a normalization of the monetary policy rates by most of the regulators across Africa, and that has already started. So during the pandemic, the monetary policy rates were reduced in a number of countries, but as we proceed, into 2022, we should see a normalization of that. In fact, some of the countries have already started even towards the end of 2021. We are also yet to see how resilient the currencies in Africa would be to tapering, as this would be happening in the course of 2022. At this stage, I mentioned that the impact across Africa is going to be very, very different. Many times we always have to be reminded that Africa is a continent, and with 54 countries, and they will all respond very differently. As you can see from the rates there, they've all responded very differently. Isabelle talked about, for example, elections that happened in Zambia. That happened in August of 2021. Immediately after the elections, we saw that the currency appreciated, the very same day that the results, came out, and then over time that started again depreciating slowly, but not to the pre-election levels. But each country is very different. Now, I won't go through country by country. Again, Isabelle did a good job of deep diving into particular countries. I'll just give quick headlines, of what we are seeing. For Angola, I think it's, 2022 is really recovering. Botswana, they have to address the fiscal, they are quite vulnerable because of, restrictions in terms of travel, and there are a lot of things that they've been doing in trying to recover from that. Cameroon is getting back on track. Cote d'Ivoire should be able to get to the 7% club. Ethiopia, the crisis that we all know is impacting growth there. And Gabon is preparing for 2023. And I'll not go, line by line. Just mention that, Kenya, I think the elections coming up, and we know that that is one item that we have to watch very, very closely. Mauritius tourism is back, and a few other countries. South Africa, I'll be able to pick it up. They will have, the ANC will be having their elections at the end of, towards the end of the year, and the current president might, we don't know whether that, he'll continue or he might not, but that is for South Africa to manage. But that is something that has to be watched very closely. But most importantly, the power wars that we have in South Africa, there's a very big deficit that they are trying to deal with. Is very, very critical. And Zambia, corrective action after the election that happened. And there's a lot of optimism that there should be recovery. And lastly, Zimbabwe, I think it will remain as is, still dealing with the issues. They are not yet resolved, so that would be deja vu. With that, I would just want to end by saying the UAE serves as a regional hub for companies seeking to test their entry into the African markets. And we have seen it from our end, where a lot of countries are coming to set up hub here, and then, they venture out into the African markets. And the good part about that is there are a lot of best practice. There's a lot of activity between the two, in this corridor, and a lot of information as well that can be obtained by setting up that hub. And that information actually goes both ways. With that, I will pause here and hand it over back to Karen.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Gosh, together with Isabelle, we have all the facts at our fingertips now. So I've got half a dozen questions here that have come in through the chat to me, and I'd like to just kick off. Sonny, as soon as you're on camera and on microphone there, can I just start with the first one for you, if you don't mind? The UAE is the second largest investor into Africa after China. Do you see the UAE rivaling China in any near future time? And if so, looking at the way you did those countries and markets for us, where do you think the UAE would focus its attention on next to try and increase its investment into the continent?
Fantastic, Karen. I think that's a very brilliant question. I think the first thing that I would say is I am very, very impressed by seeing how, most of the African markets have actually reached out. So they have not actually, sat back to and waited. For example, if you look at how almost each and every African country has actually participated in the Expo 2020. And, country by country, they've been having, their national days, and a lot of new opportunities are being discussed. I have attended a few national days for a few countries. I have seen trade, agreements are being signed with, Chamber of Commerce from UAE and, from the countries from Africa. And that is just the beginning, in my view, because there's a lot more that could be achieved. And with what we are seeing now, I think that the biggest challenge for most of the African countries, Karen, at the moment, is that post the pandemic, they still have to raise financing. And they're trying to manage, to bring in some fiscal discipline. But at the same time, they are actually, they need funding. So we are seeing that very big challenge on where do they go and, get more funding. Over the years, China has remained very, very strong in terms of, giving aid to most of the African countries. But they are also going through some restructuring. Many of them are going through the IMF, program and so on. So what I'm seeing is even though there will be the demand, even though there'll be the temptation to get more debt, I think the solution will really lie on looking at increasing productivity, looking at other channels which would actually help most of the African countries to bring economic growth through trade agreements. And that is where I think countries like UAE comes in and plays a very, very critical role ahead of many other countries.
Thank you, Sonny. You tackled three questions in one there. So one of the questions that we had was, what's the barrier? What is the challenge at the moment? And you've come up with the obvious reference to COVID and debt and China playing that really important role. Also interesting seeing the EU's decline there in terms of those numbers in your graph at the beginning. So definitely a role there for the UAE to increase its presence quite actively. And I think Emirates Airlines actually had an enormous role to play. We talked about Ethiopian Airlines in our chat before. Emirates has paved the way for that corridor to actually be incredibly active over the last few years. I think if I can, I'd like to ask Michael and Isabelle a question here, which is, how do you see the UAE plans to engage with the security issues that you mentioned in your overview, is at the same time as trying to deepen its relationships with certain markets on the continent? I mean, what sort of priority and what sort of emphasis will the UAE place on the security issues in terms of its own planning for growing and deepening relationships?
So I won't speak for the UAE, but for what I see is that the UAE knows how to invest in emerging markets, and they have the knowledge of how this works and how to work with people and government in emerging markets, and they have already started. I think it depends as well on the relations they will have with the different governments in place to ensure their investments are maintained within those countries, despite the different political and security issues or threats. I mean, I don't speak about UAE right now, but I mean, in Guinea, we've seen that despite the coup, the mining operations have been being maintained because it was in the interest of the country, but also in the interest of the economic operators. So, I mean, sometimes we have these huge political and security threats, but it doesn't mean that important economic sectors would be affected because it's not in the interest of the government. Also, yeah, depending on the relations one economic investor may have with the government, or depending on how the economic investor takes mitigation measures in face of this potential threat, its economic operation may continue despite political and security risk. It really depends on how it plays, but also what is the most important is the knowledge of these risks and knowing how we could mitigate it while operating across the continent. I mean, there have been multiple trade opportunities that have even increased over the past 10, 20 years, and it has been done in the backdrop of those political and security situation. So I guess that many economic actors know how to play with those threats in order not to be affected in their business operations.
Thank you, Isabelle. I know it's a complicated question, but politics and economics are quite intertwined on the continent, so you can't talk about one without the other. Sonny, one here for you. How do you see, as you're in the region, how do you see the competition between the UAE and Saudi and Qatar and the rest of the region play out in terms of their plans for and their strategies for economic growth in Africa, on the continent?
Great. So we see that actually as very, very good for all the economies and good, for everyone. There has been enhanced competition, I must just say. One of the things that we have seen over the past few months, probably getting to 18 to 24 months, is that a lot of countries in the region, they have been looking at how do they attract more investments, how do they attract more people. If you look at Saudi, it has just opened up, a number of restrictions that were there before. It has now become much more easier for companies to go and open up offices and set up there. Now, what that means is that it's actually good for everybody, because as competition increases, then everybody begins to be innovative, begins to look at, if there's an investor out there, which country are they going to choose? And we have seen also that even when it comes to players, including, like the financial sector, for instance, once one regulator begins to have some reforms or to look at, new regulations, for example, open banking, some of the countries like Bahrain, took a first step. As that happens, the other countries in the region, then they begin to look at the progress and saying, how do we introduce this in our country? And that is very, very good. So for now, I'll say that the GCC region, the Middle East, has actually evolved significantly over the past few months to years. And for this reason, to continue to grow. The numbers that we are seeing now, these are record numbers. For example, I talked about the property market. We have not seen this high number of transactions in the property market in the UAE. This is the highest that we have seen, and month on month that continues. And a lot of more people that are still coming in and looking for opportunities. And the UAE, I'll finish with this one, has actually made it even easier to set up companies here. If you want to, set up your company, you want to open accounts, it's very, very easy to, to be done. So that competition is there, and it's very, very good.
Thank you very much to you, Sonny, and Isabelle, if you'd like to come back on camera just for a moment there. We've come to the end of the questions. A number of them have folded into one another. And I think we've had a really comprehensive overview. I think to use Sonny's words, the outlook is bullish. The numbers are there, and COVID has just been a temporary blip, really. And the trend is very much one on the upward ascendancy there. And Isabelle, from your perspective, economics perhaps will drive the political situation in a favorable way and help to actually strengthen those relationships rather than for companies and businesses to be deterred by some of the difficulties. And so, Michael, from your side and Isabelle's side, I think it's been a fascinating journey and a look. I mean, the one thing we can say for certain is that it's not predictable, that 2022 will be the same as every other year in Africa, with a lot of things going on, challenges and opportunities in equal measure. So Invest Africa was in Ethiopia on 2 investor missions in 2019. And here we are today, hoping for a resolution so that we can return with our business and members and network to the country, which has so much going for it. Equally, now we're looking at Tanzania in May as an opportunity to take an investor trip there. So it moves and shapes with the politics of the region. Sonny, I'm sure that everybody who has been watching would love to have a chance to read your presentation one more time. So I'm going to offer to share that with the audience. I just would like to say thank you to all of you once again for being on the webinar today. Hassan has excused himself as well, but it was wonderful to have the Dubai Chambers support at the beginning of the event. So many thanks to all of you, and look forward to doing this again in a year's time.